You never voted for this. You didn't see it on a ballot. It wasn't debated in a town hall. No campaign promised it. And yet, right now, a decision made on your behalf is quietly shaping your future income, your cost of living, and even how secure your savings really are. It's government debt, and it's already your problem. Not because you agreed to it, but because of how the system works. Picture this. A finance minister stands at a podium, cameras flashing. They announce a new spending package, infrastructure, relief, growth, stability. Markets nod, headlines scroll. Life goes on. No one knocks on your door to ask permission. No one asks how you'd like to pay for it. The money just appears. And that's where the story actually begins. Because government debt doesn't behave like personal debt. If you miss a credit card payment, the bank calls. If a business borrows too much, it can fail. But when governments borrow, something stranger happens. They don't default the way people do. They don't run out of money the way households do. Instead, the cost spreads, slowly, quietly, across everyone, even people who never voted for it. And that's why this matters right now. Over the last few decades, government debt has exploded, not just in one country, almost everywhere. In many advanced economies, debt is now larger than the entire economy itself, in some far larger. And yet, there's no panic, no emergency vote, no dramatic reckoning, because the system is designed so that you don't feel the bill all at once. You feel it later, in pieces, in places that don't look like debt at all. To understand how that happens, we need to slow down and follow the chain. Step 1 is borrowing. When a government wants to spend more than it collects in taxes, it issues bonds. These are basically IOUs, promises to pay back money later with interest. Who buys them? Banks, pension funds, insurance companies, foreign governments, sometimes even your own retirement account. At this stage, it feels harmless, almost responsible. Debt, after all, is framed as investment. Build now, pay later, grow faster. And for a while, it works. But then the pile grows. Deficits become normal. Emergency spending becomes permanent. Temporary programs never quite end. And soon the question stops being, should we borrow? It becomes, how do we manage the borrowing we already have? That's where things get uncomfortable. Because eventually, debt reaches a point where paying it back directly would be politically impossible. Raising taxes enough to cover it would be unpopular. Cutting spending enough to reduce it would be painful. So governments reach for a third option. They don't say it out loud. They don't put it in the budget summary. But it's there. They change how the debt is paid for. Enter the central bank. Officially, the central bank is independent, technocratic, neutral. Its job is stability, low inflation, smooth markets. But when government debt grows large enough, stability starts to mean something very specific: keeping borrowing cheap. Because if interest rates rise too much, debt servicing costs explode, budgets strain, confidence cracks. So central banks step in. They buy government bonds, they inject liquidity, they promise markets that everything is under control. This is often described as technical, temporary, boring. It's anything but. Because when a central bank buys government debt, it changes the nature of that debt. It no longer is just a promise between a government and investors. It becomes intertwined with the money supply itself. And that's the key mechanism most people never see. Debt doesn't have to be paid back in the way you imagine. It can be diluted. If the amount of money in the system grows faster than the economy, the value of each unit falls. Prices rise. Purchasing power erodes. No one calls this a tax, but it functions like one. A tax on savings. A tax on fixed incomes. A tax on anyone whose wages don't keep up. You don't get a bill in the mail. You just notice that groceries cost more. Rent stretches further. Your cash doesn't go as far as it used to. And the connection to government debt is invisible by design. There's an irony here. Voters are extremely sensitive to explicit taxes. A 1% increase can cause outrage. But the slow erosion of purchasing power? That rarely sparks protests. It feels abstract, debatable, easy to blame on something else. Supply chains, greed, global events. And yes, those play roles, but underneath it all sits the same quiet pressure. Too much debt, serviced indirectly. Now zoom out. This isn't just about inflation, it's about incentives. When governments learn that debt can be managed this way, discipline changes. Why make hard choices today when costs can be spread across decades? Why cut spending now when the consequences will be diluted, deferred, and diffused? Debt becomes politically convenient, almost painless in the short term. And voters, understandably, respond to what they can see. New programs, visible benefits, immediate relief. The bill? That's for later, for someone else, for the system. Until later arrives. And when it does, it rarely looks like a crisis at first. It looks like stagnation, like wages that never quite catch up, like asset prices rising faster than incomes, like young people needing more debt just to stand still. This is how government debt becomes everyone's problem without a single vote, not through a dramatic collapse, but through a gradual shift in how value moves through the economy. There's another layer that makes this even more unsettling. Once debt is large enough, it starts limiting choices. Raising interest rates becomes dangerous. Cutting spending becomes destabilizing. Even talking about reform can spook markets. So policy narrows. Options shrink. Future governments inherit fewer degrees of freedom. And voters, again, never consented to that trade-off. They didn't vote to give tomorrow fewer choices. They voted on promises made in the present. This is where the contrast between hype and reality becomes sharp. Hype says debt doesn't matter, that governments can always manage it, that growth will save us. Reality is quieter. Debt matters not because it explodes overnight, but because it shapes everything around it. Who bears risk? Who gains from asset inflation? Who loses from currency dilution? And those effects are not evenly distributed. If you own assets, rising prices can feel like prosperity. If you rely on wages or savings, it feels very different. The system doesn't ask which side you're on. It just runs. Now, step back even further. This isn't a story about one policy mistake or one irresponsible government. It's structural. Modern economies are built on credit. Political systems are built on promises. And debt sits at the intersection of both. Undoing it would require visible pain, admitting limits, telling voters no. That's not impossible, but it's rare. Much easier to manage perception, to smooth the edges, to let time and inflation do the work. And that brings us to the uncomfortable question. If debt can grow without a vote, if its costs can be hidden without consent, if its consequences show up years later under different leaders, who is actually deciding? And more importantly, at what point does a system designed to avoid hard choices become one that can no longer make them? That question doesn't have a clean answer, which is exactly why it matters. Enjoyed this video? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to level up your money game with Monetary Mentor.